Hello, everyone. My name is Chuck Matthews. I'm a professor at the University of Cincinnati and also the editor of the Annals of Entrepreneurship Education and Research, volumes 3 and 4, along with my most excellent co-editor, Dr. Eric Liguori. We're here today to talk a little bit about volume 4, which will be coming out in January of 2021. And joining us today, we are most fortunate to have with us one of our contributors to Volume 4 as a master entrepreneurship educator, Dr. Paul Jones. Dr. Jones is a professor of entrepreneurship and innovation and head of the business department at Swansea University in Wales in the UK, and editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Entrepreneurial Behavior and Research, as well as the associate editor for the International Journal of Management Education. He's also editor of the Emerald book series on contemporary issues in entrepreneurship research, and is a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy and is on the board of trustees of the Institute for Small Business and Entrepreneurship, ISBE. Paul, welcome. It's great to have you here. It's great to see you. Welcome, and it's good to see you again here.
Thank you, Charles, and many thanks for the invitation to talk to you today.
Well, it's great to have you here for a number of reasons. Obviously, I think this is your first contribution to the Annals, and it was an exceptional piece that you wrote. And I know folks are going to be looking forward to getting their copy at the USASB conference in January. And your extensive global work make you a natural for this. And I think it was a great group of the 5 master entrepreneurship educators that you joined in this volume. Paul, you note very astutely in your article, to survive, the entrepreneurship discipline must rapidly adjust, evolve, and disseminate best practices across the sector. Share with our listeners, if you would, a little bit more about the why and how this is important. Obviously, very important in terms of our current situation of COVID-19, but beyond, in relationship to COVID-19 and beyond COVID-19. Can you share a little bit more about that with our listeners?
Yeah, I was reflecting on the growth of the entrepreneurship discipline in recent decades, and it's still a relatively new business management discipline. It's emerged since the 1970s from the US, but it's grown exponentially. I've been fortunate enough to work all over the world, in Africa, in India, in China, and extensively in Europe, teaching entrepreneurship education. And all economies in the world are trying to ensure that entrepreneurship is built into their educational curriculums from first schooling all the way through up to the university curriculums. So there's been this huge headlong rush into teaching entrepreneurship. And as somebody who's been in entrepreneurship education for approaching 20 years, I reflect on how we are researching into entrepreneurship education. And I can see, there's been a huge growth in the literature. There's been it's nice to see a growth in the number of entrepreneurship type journals to support this growth. There still isn't enough entrepreneurship journals, in my opinion, and there needs to be further growth in this area and in the quality of the journals that exist at the moment. But we're still in the process of talking about what we're doing. So we're still talking about the pedagogies. We're still talking about, right, well, I did some entrepreneurship education. This was the impact of my teaching experience upon my on my students. And I think we need to take the literature very quickly into reflecting on the longitudinal impacts upon our student groups, into their post student careers. Have they gone into self-employment? I've done a little bit of research in this area, and I can already see that they dip in and out of self-employment. They go into different careers, but there's certainly a need for us to further develop this literature, looking at the careers following graduation.
Excellent. That's a very good insight. And a natural segue to my next question. Tell us a little bit how you've seen entrepreneurship evolve over the years.
Yeah.
Kind of the beginning, middle, and where we are today.
Yeah, very much when I began, it was all about the business plan, and the bottom line, profit, 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 basically. Where and we used to be obsessed with cash flows and forecasts. Thankfully, we've moved away from that. The ideology has moved away from that as well to the triple bottom line, people, planet, profit. But very much the process now is about ideation, again, coming out of America, basically, in places like Babson, of the development and the testing of the business idea. And we've also seen the evolution of the pedagogies as well. We can reflect on entrepreneurship education now, not as a mass taught subject, but as a very specialist type of degree program, which is quite resource intensive, and it requires specialist people to teach it. And it's it's a very experiential type program. So in the UK, we've had new developments, 2-year degrees. We've had degrees based entirely on experience, as opposed to a traditionally taught theoretically based degree. There is still a lot of research, referring back to my earlier point, there's a huge amount of research needing to be done to test the validity of these methods and the end outcome in terms of, are we creating entrepreneurial people? And I think that's the most important message. We create entrepreneurial people, not necessarily businesses, viable businesses with huge intellectual property at the end of the degree process. Perhaps it's about the individual who will go on to launch a number of successful ventures. And we can't really expect, enormous, brilliant businesses from a 21-year-old. Perhaps that will happen, later on in their careers.
That's again a great insight, because it is about what the individual does with the knowledge, with the information, and we're preparing them for that, not just for today, but obviously into the future. And indeed, the pedagogies have evolved, still very experientially based, but obviously evolved around content development as well. So yeah, we don't always see the immediate gratification of a student starting a business, but at the same time, we know that they're well prepared for that down the road, which kind of brings us.
There's a conflict there, isn't there, between we want these people to go and launch great businesses, but also we want them to get a degree at the same time. So there's always going to be a conflict there, I feel, which will never be resolved unless we can have more accreditation for the business startup process. But it's still a degree essentially, so we still got to have an academic process, and that element of criticality where the student has to develop their thought processes.
Precisely, and I always think of it in terms of our entrepreneurship as a discipline is still very young, and the reasonable expectations, I think, are still evolving as well. I mean, let's face it, I took maybe 4 or 5 chemistry classes at university, but I'm not a chemist. I took a number of physics classes, but I'm not a physicist. And so, it's an interesting idea. Of course, we do talk about this as a mindset often, but I think that, again, is very nascent. It's still very much evolving in terms of how we think of it, because just about anything could be a mindset.